In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects. This podcast is not just about dissecting topics from two different perspectives. It's also about how to have conversations on difficult topics while avoiding the urge to tear someone's head off and vomit down the bloody stump of their neck.
And so, we were just talking for a moment about, whether, one distrusts all of the politicians or just the politicians from one side. And of course, that's sort of interesting because at the moment there is something that's I'm going to call out the Democrats on, or Democratic leadership on, because they have been very slow moving in trying to push forward these rules about limiting Congress and their ability to trade in stocks. And this one is particularly falls on Nancy Pelosi. She has been not willing to go and put forth some of these rules. A lot of people have been calling for it. A lot of the lower level Democrats have been calling for it, and of course, some Republicans are calling for it because they want to see Nancy Pelosi, squirm publicly. And the reason why I say that is because this is not a new issue. And the Republicans had many opportunities to go and pass such a thing. And in fact, during the COVID shutdown, there were a lot of Republicans that were caught trading stocks on insider information. And I'm not saying it's just Republicans that do that, because Nancy Pelosi is doing exactly the same thing. She and her husband are making a lot of money on some of these insider stock trades. But the fact that Republicans are now calling for it when they can't do anything about it is sort of telling. But I do call out the Democratic leadership for absolutely not stopping some of this corruption within Congress.
Well, I'm glad to hear you attacking both sides. Because I do think you're absolutely right that both sides are, if on one issue one side is more guilty than the other, there's other issues where the other side, like they're so equivalent in my mind. I do happen, in spite of being a libertarian, I do happen to agree with the Republicans more often, I would think. And I don't know, maybe that's just because, we're more affected by economic issues than other ones. Um, some of the more social issues, it might be surprising to you to hear. I tend to agree more with the Democrats just because they seem to be more hands off, and the Republicans tend to be more smaller government, at least in word, if not always in action.
Yeah, they haven't been following through on that recently. Yeah.
No, they certainly haven't. So anyway, yeah, it's an interesting discussion, but
Yeah, the political environment is people tend to be the most vocal, or at least the politicians tend to be most vocal when they have the least amount of control, because no one's going to actually hold them to do anything. So they can call out the other side as much as they'd like, and it's never their responsibility to do anything. Now, if everything switches in November, and we end up with Republicans in control, all the things they're yelling about right now, many of them they're going to get very quiet on. Now, there's some that they feel very passionate about, and they're probably going to push those through. But a lot of the ones like the stock trading for Congress, people in Congress, I think they'll get very quiet on that one. I will be shocked if they actually passed any sort of bill once they're in a position of power. But please, I hope they shock me.
yeah. Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, the other side of it is you act as if, I don't know, that, well, once you're in power, you have both houses and the presidency. Well, you can do what you want, but it seems still difficult. I mean, even Obama, Obamacare, they couldn't pass it. It seems like the way that they wanted, because it's just difficult to pass those types of issues. The tax cuts, I don't know. I think there are plenty of Republicans who would have wanted to pass lower taxes for everybody. I tend to think, like, as duplicitous as they are, the Republicans probably would have passed lower tax rates for everybody indefinitely. What is what is so frustrating to me is they didn't really focus very hard on lowering the spending.
Yeah, that is always interesting. Where they focus so much on decreasing the money coming into the government, but they don't decrease the amount of money going out of the government. So it is
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really crazy. I mean, it was a Republican Congress, and really, I think Trump submitted a budget, and they wanted to spend even more, which was an increase, and then they wanted to spend even more than that. So that
Yes.
what they passed, their spending bill was even more than Trump had asked for. You're like, holy cow, we just reduced taxes. You guys, I am of the opinion that lower tax rates, for certain, for wealthy people and for corporations are, you know, given where our tax rates were, are going to increase tax revenues, because people are no longer going to have to hide corporate taxes overseas. They're, no longer going to be hiding in, tax-free municipal bonds. I think there probably is, depending on what the economy does, there are going to be an increase in revenues, but not enough to be offset by increases in spending. Like we had to reduce spending just to we're running at a deficit as it is. It's just crazy what they're doing.
Yeah.
But
Well, and I'm also, once again, I'm going to hold the Democrats responsible for some devious behavior. Back when Obama was pushing through his healthcare system and he had Nancy Pelosi to help him with it, the Democrats had a pretty significant majority. And so they had enough people in Congress that they didn't need to pass the healthcare bill with Republican assistance. And so they did not, they had no, they decided we're going to pass as much as we can and make it as much as a bill that we would like and not really concern ourselves with whether Republicans like it or not. And so the consequence of that is that the Republicans felt like they were left out of the relationship. They didn't get anything in the bill that they wanted. And so then as soon as they got into positions of power, whether it was in the federal government or even some of the state governments, they made it their mission to try and undermine and chip away at what Obamacare was. Whereas if the Democrats had not taken quite such a big piece of the pie, but it had a little bit of compromise, even small compromise with the Republicans, I don't think he would have had as strong a pushback against it and as many attempts to try and take away some of what Obamacare actually put through. So that was, again, the fault of the Democrats in trying to take more than they probably should have.
I think you're right. I think just in general, people tend to, in government, it becomes a zero-sum game because one party gets into power and really crams things down the throat of the other party, and then vice versa. And if
Mm-hmm.
there were more collaboration and consensus building, then I think, which if we could get away from a two-party system, I think would happen more often.
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah. It does seem to be a very short term view of what the power that they have. We for all they know, we can only hold on to this power for 2 or 4 years. We better get as much stuff done as we can and step on as many toes, or not worry about how many toes we step on, because at a certain point the pendulum is going to swing the other way. We'll lose that power, and then we're going to be the one that's going to be trying to resist what the other party is trying to do, and they're going to step on our toes, and then we'll just sort of flip-flop roles rather than looking at how can we work together and put together something that maybe not everybody loves, but most people can tolerate.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay.
No,
Well,
since we've gone so much kind of off the topic we'd intended, I might take us to another little diversion, something that occurred to me, and it's something that I'd like to have your opinion on. It's something that just came about, and it's not related to the topic we planned on discussing. It was a realization that I had that. Okay, so we have talked many times, maybe too many times, about the bias in the media. And we've also, in various discussions, one of the things that you'll often default to in terms of solutions is letting the market decide, using the market to determine to solve the problems. And it occurred to me that it is possible, maybe probable, that the bias we have in the media is due to market forces, because the top 10 programs in all the news channels, first of all, 9 of the 10 are all on Fox News. Most people that watch news are watching Fox News, and all 10 of those programs, I believe all 10 of them, were opinion or editorial based programming. So programs that aren't really interested in presenting, let's say, facts, more interested in using the facts as an opportunity to put forth my opinion and my perspective. And if those are the most popular programs, maybe that is actually the market saying, we're not interested in unbiased news. We're interested in people yelling and screaming and blowing things out of proportion. If you look at the most popular news shows, those tend, it appears, if one's going to be, either blunt or biased, however you wanted to put it, those tend to be the most popular shows where someone is aggressive, is fierce, is holding the other side to task. So maybe this is the market working correctly. What do you think?
A couple things I'd say about that. One, do you consider Joe Rogan mainstream media?
No. Is it a podcast? I don't know that I would consider that medium part of the mainstream media.
Um, and because I would say he has more of a following than I think even Fox News. I think, Fox News has the biggest because it's one of the few options that conservatives have. But I mean, I don't think any of them come close to the number of people that are listening to Joe Rogan. And he covers a lot of current events. I mean, it certainly is opinion based. It's not, he doesn't even he tries to be unbiased, I guess, but he doesn't come out saying, "Hey, I'm going to be fair and balanced." He just talks with people, and sometimes with people he agrees with, and sometimes people he doesn't. But he certainly has a much bigger following, and I think there's a big push in society right now that people are saying, "I don't get my news from the main, the typical what historically would have been mainstream media. I get it from social media, from podcasts, from other places because I just don't trust." Anyway, that was just a thought. Maybe there's more to look into there, but I think there's something to it there because Joe Rogan does have a huge following. I mean, 10 times the amount, I think, of many of these other what historically have been considered mainstream media. And to your point, well, I mean, you were saying a second ago, well, listen, a lot of these aren't really they're opinions. They're opinion based programming, even by their own admission. I don't think people think that Tucker Carlson or um, some of these others are, what we would have considered Walter Cronkite type people. They're
Right.
kind of spouting their opinions, even these new mainstream media sources. Anyway, that's one thing I would look at. But then two, so maybe we need to reconsider a little bit what mainstream media is at some point. I don't know. But another thing I would say is I think, as I've said before, this partisan um, environment that we have in the media. I don't know that there's too many people these days that think the media is very unbiased. I think they realize it's pretty partisan. And I think that is in large part due to the two-party system. Because, yeah, if we make this weird environment where there's only two political parties, then, to my mind, that's not really a free market. I mean, you might say, well, the media is different from politics, but when they're covering these politics, they they feel for whatever reason, because there's only two options, they tend towards one of those options. I mean, if there were like we see in some other, it would be interesting, and maybe I just don't know enough about it, but to see what some of these other places like Ireland or other places in Europe or Asia that do have more of coalition building, more options for parties, and these parties seem to come and go. If their media coverage is a little bit different, or if it's just as partisan, because I think we probably could find the free market, the media in the free market in those countries and see, is that different? Because when you have just two parties and you start to say things that, I think the two-party system tends to encourage those media outlets to support one more than the other, even if unconsciously. Because when all these people, it's almost like a politician, you're kind of being a ringleader. And, if you're going to go out there and present things in this unbiased way, there's a lot of people that disagree with you and they're going to get frustrated with that. And they're going to tend towards another news source that is kind of a cheerleader for your way of thinking. But I think that it would happen less if there were more options in the political sphere.
So you're saying that the media is the way it is because the political system is the way it is.
Yep.
And not, I mean, but of course, one of the big differences is that we've discussed before that with the political system, it's not very democratic because of the ability of money to influence, whereas the individual voter can vote, of course, but they have a lot less influence. Whereas viewership being the primary goal of any news show or podcast, if you want to include them, and I'm not opposed to including them. So the number of viewers can dramatically impact whether a show is considered successful or not, because the more viewers it has, the more sponsorship you can get, the more ads you can get. So in that respect, you could make the argument, and I think maybe I am making the argument, that it's actually the population that has more control over the news shows than politics has influencing the news shows.
I would agree. I would agree that, but the people that are making the decisions, the population, they have two choices. They are Democrats or they're Republicans for the most part because of the two-party system that we have, because of the weaknesses that we've talked about in the past, which I think has a lot to do with um, the fact that we have primaries, which are unnecessary, and the fact that we don't have ranked choice voting. And perhaps there's other reasons as well, but for whatever reason, we have a very it's I don't know how unique it is in the world, but we only have two parties. No other party can have very much influence at all. Well, in that situation, milieu, as they would say, in that situation, the two party situation, how are you going to get the most viewers? You're going to appeal to them either as a Republican or Democrat, one that kind of leans that way. I think if there were more coalition building, more consensus building in the political system, then you would have more options, not just according to those political parties, but it would be more dynamic in the political situation. So I think it would also be more dynamic in the media situation. Like if you look at Fox News, how do they gain viewership? They don't gain it by being fair and balanced. They gain it by being, and I don't even think it's necessarily malicious or a conscious decision. Guys like Tucker Carlson do well because they appeal to a certain group of people, and then he becomes popular. If they had fair and balanced people on there, it would be hard to pull Democrats to that side. I would think.
You are right, and I do agree with you, but I think it also is an oversimplification because it's not just if we take Fox News as the example right now. There are some people on Fox News that are just presenting news. There are some people that offer a more moderate view, and then there are the people that offer a more extreme, more aggressive, more challenging view. If we look at Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, Jeanine Pirro. These are all people that can be pretty aggressive in terms of pushing forth their opinion and in their attacks on the Democrats. So it's not just that they're pushing the Republican perspective on Fox News. The shows that are popular push a very particular type of conservatism, and it's not more conservative; it's just more aggressive. In their approach to all of the different views. So I think that is people are choosing which of the different shows they want to watch, and people are choosing to watch that type of conservatism, that type of showmanship, in the same way that the Real Housewives of whatever location were so popular. All the reality TV shows, people like the gossip, they like the drama, they like seeing people fighting and getting angry. And I feel like these particular hosts are the ones that are capitalizing on it and attracting the common people. I was having a really interesting conversation with someone I know, and I was telling them about what you and I do. And the guy said that I was talking to said, "Oh, you guys should fight and argue and blow up and yell at each other. You get lots of people watching your show." And I was saying, but that's not the point. That's not what we're actually the opposite of the point. But he's right. I believe that is what people want to see. They don't want to see reasonable, rational conversations. They want to see blowups and yelling.
You could be right. Yeah, there's probably some truth to that. I mean, I do think that's more popular, so there's probably some truth to the fact that people do like that better. I think that's true.
So then you could argue that the market is in many ways, or at least I'm putting forth the argument, the market is driving this divisiveness not only in the political culture, but in the media culture as well.
I think the market does have a lot to do with that, yes. To say that the political system doesn't, I think, is missing the point.
You're right. No, you're right. It's not that the political culture is responding to the popular culture. I think that I think to a degree it does. I think there's particular individuals that are really capitalizing on that. Whether it's the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Lauren Boeberts that really thrive in that sort of confrontational and their followers. And the reason why I'm assuming you know those two people. Some first year congresswoman from Georgia and a first-year congresswoman from Colorado. We know them because they're in the news a lot, because they get a lot of attention, not because they're particularly insightful, particularly smart, or effective at what they do, but because they keep on getting their face and their comments in the news. And so the news responds by giving them airtime, and then we hear about them. And there are some people that really love that not just because they're their particular congressperson, but because they like the energy they put out.
Yeah, it could be. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, maybe there does seem to be a bit of a trend. I mean, you have Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, AOC, many of these others that are confrontational, that bombastic, uh, and uh, but it doesn't seem like it was too. I mean, it doesn't seem like it was too long ago. I mean, people disliked his policies, but people respected Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, uh, Bill Clinton, Obama. People looked up to them. It doesn't seem like, and I'm trying to think back to, I guess I didn't know as much about senators and congressmen back then, but I don't know. That didn't seem like it was as much that way. I wonder if we're headed to a trend where this is going to continue or this is kind of a blip. I saw somebody had written something recently that when you have a major event, both like the 2008 crisis and then the pandemic, that people are going to feel like they've had something taken from them. And they're going to respond with more divisive politics. So some people have said, yeah, this was kind of expected, but this seems a bit over the top, even for what we would have expected. I mean, you look back to previous years. I mean, McCarthy, there was divisiveness in previous years, but I don't know. Maybe it's a cycle, and we'll have some more reasonable people in the future. I don't feel like Biden is a return to being more reasonable, but maybe the next one will be, whether Republican or Democrat. I don't know.
I think that if you ask people left of center, they would say that was one of the more moderate options that was out there. That some of the people felt a little more passionately about a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or Peter Buttigieg, who they felt. There's some people that felt they would have been more effective, but Joe Biden, 40 years in government, he's got a lot of I don't want to say gravitas isn't the right word, but a lot of history. He's got a lot of experience. And I could be trying to fit the situation to a theory. I don't know if this one actually works, but I mean, we've all heard that in times of crisis that people tend to unify and band together. And when Reagan was president, we had there was the Cold War was still going on. There was still that existential threat of global nuclear war. And that slowly broke down and came away. And then when George W. Bush came around, there was the 9/11, and so we were all unified against the terrorists. And we haven't really had since 9/11, and actually since 9/11, there's been a lot of disillusionment about that particular conflict, about the fact that we were first in Afghanistan and then in Iraq, and the questioning, are we doing any good? Do we have reason to be there? And so there's been this gradual disappointment, and also there has not been a unifying motivation in the country to bring everybody together. And so we can't join together to fight an external enemy. We tend to fight each other. That's
What
my
about
my speculation on it.
the pandemic? Should have done that.
Well, I mean that was we were still fighting each other on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't bring us together.
No, it didn't. No, and I don't know if that was the mismanagement by the government or if there was it just wasn't. I tend, and again, I could be applying a reason that is not actually accurate, but it seemed to me that the people that were out there, the ones that'll say I'd spill my blood, I'd give my life for my country, for my flag, didn't have that same enthusiasm when it came to doing what needed to be done for the virus or against the virus. Because it wasn't an external, a human enemy. And maybe that's not the best comparison, but it seemed like there was a different reaction to dealing with COVID than there is to dealing with a terrorist or dealing with a Hitler or whatever it might be.
Um, Maybe we'll get a better leader at some point.
Maybe.
I mean, whatever you want to say about Trump, um, they, I don't think they gave him a fair shake, and I think a fair shake would have shown us enough bad anyway. I just don't think he got a fair shake. But I mean, to have a leader, I think you got to look back to like Obama. I mean, I really like George W. Bush, but I don't know. It's interesting, to hear you say the things you do about Biden. Sometimes I listen to Biden and think, man, does he even know? Like, I don't know if it's just the clips I'm seeing, but it reminds me of George W. Bush when you see these clips, like, holy cow, that guy can't string a sentence together sometimes.
It has been interesting, and I feel like when he was vice president, they kept a tighter leash on him because there were one or two times he had these little verbal vomits that Obama would then have to go and like you do his little magic on to smooth things over, and so I don't know if he used to be really capable at it and he just lost his ability to communicate to the general public, to a TV. I don't know, but yeah, I do agree with you. He hasn't been the most coherent leader.
Well, he and Kamala both, you're like, sometimes you hear the things that they say, and although they're taken out of context, I think I could do a better job, and I'm a horrible public speaker. I mean, it's brutal these days. And so we've gone from, you know, uh, I don't know, you've gone from Obama, who was very eloquent and very good in those situations, to these two. I mean, to Trump, who was a bit all over the place. And even when I find myself required to defend him, he's difficult to defend the things that he says. And then, you have Biden and Kamala, which is just, I wonder why we're headed to this direction where, first you had George W. Bush, who I think was a really good person. I know you totally disagree, and many people do, but I think he made poor choices, but a good person, but really not a charismatic, amazing leader. I mean, Donald Trump, that's another interesting one. And then you have Biden and Kamala, and you're thinking, man, where are we getting these people from? And why is it that they're rising to the top of a group of people that you'd think a requirement would be massive amounts of charisma? I mean, you go back and listen to Ronald Reagan, you might get really angry, but he had a real way with words. Obama, you might really disagree with him, but man, he could handle a room and
Yeah.
he could handle a debate. I mean, a great speaker. I would hate to have to debate him. It would be, I mean, it'd be like, it just would be unfair for me to debate him because he's so good. And then you get to these other people. I wonder, there's just a lot of weird directions that we're heading um, in our society. Yeah, the media seems to be all over the place. We're getting these weird people that are pretty divisive. A lot of people think that Joe Biden is divisive. I know there maybe could have been more divisive people, but some of the things that he says, they think he's pretty divisive, and just the things. I don't know. It's interesting the leaders that we're selecting at this stage.
Yeah, and there was, I think I may have told you this before, but there when all the Democratic primaries were happening for the presidency, they were interviewing somebody in South Carolina, and they asking, who are you going to vote for? Who do you want to be to be the Democratic candidate? And he's saying, I think I'd like Joe Biden because I could sit on my porch with him and have a cup of tea and just talk. And I'm thinking that's who you want to lead the country, someone you could hang out with on your front porch and just have a chat with. That's not a criteria, but I do feel like that's who it's been. And I used to make fun of the Republicans because it seemed like they kept on electing that person or putting that person forward. And then Biden comes along and the Democrats are doing the same thing. It's like, how are you choosing your leaders? Mitt
Yeah.
Romney, I think, would have been a pretty good president. I think he was articulate. He could speak to a group. He could command the room. Um, and then he started talking, directly to the far right side of the party, and he lost my interest. But I think that he probably would have come back to center once it came time to compete against the Democrat. But at that point, I'm not going to be as enthusiastic. So.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that we've had well, I guess Mitt Romney, maybe unfortunately for him, ran up against Obama,
Yeah,
which was
that's true.
that was a tough person to beat. I mean, as much as, I mean, there was some, uh, it's interesting. Yeah, there was some people I think voted for him just because, well, they would have voted for him just because he was black, but he was such a powerful leader too, such a charismatic person, a great way, so great at presentation. So that may have been unfortunate if you're a fan of Romney, or unfortunate for Romney that he ran up against that, because that was a difficult person to beat.
Yeah, and you have to ask yourself at the same time, would Trump have been as successful in 2016 if he wasn't against Hillary Clinton?
Yeah, or Biden. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, maybe he wouldn't have gotten so many votes if not for that. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Like Hillary keeps talking about the election being stolen and this Russian interference, and you're thinking, man, you have no excuses. If you couldn't win that fight, then you probably shouldn't have been there.
and I have to give her, a little bit of room there because if I lost to Donald Trump, I'd be looking for a reason as well.
Yeah, probably true. It was interesting. Yeah, I don't know. It was interesting that they selected those two to some degree. I mean, maybe it was just because the other candidates were so outrageous or out of the ordinary or something, but two people that seemed to have paid their dues. It was almost like this political machine was saying, well, these two have been here
Which
long
two?
enough, Hillary and Biden.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. 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 Part of the part of the party. Yeah.
Yeah, so they've paid their dues. They've been here long enough. It's their turn almost. And you're thinking, why wouldn't you guys just choose the people? Although I don't think there was a lot of great options other than Biden, but that could be my bias, I guess. But yeah, maybe there just weren't a lot of good choices. But it was like they chose two people that you think, wow, I don't feel like those were really dynamic, great choices, but they've been here long enough. I don't know. Maybe the thought was they just have the best chance of winning. There's certainly an argument to be made there too. But
Well, there was a little bit of noise that when Hillary got the nomination, that there was some backroom dealings that weren't directly above board, that there was some stacking of the deck in her favor, because what you're saying, that she was more of a mainstream candidate, kind of your standard normal Democrat. And they thought that the party leaders thought she would have a better chance to win than than the Bernie Sanders, for example. Whether that's true or not, no one can really say. But I think that would help to, what you're saying, that, the mainstreams were the ones that were given the position, whether they deserved it or not.
and it seemed like the media did a little bit of that too.
Mm-hmm.
That they really wanted Hillary, which it makes you wonder if we're supposed to have this. What's going on that we're supposed to have this free market, yet it seems to be stacking the deck. I don't know when there's just, and that's why I always look for a true free market. Like sometimes people will make, I think you've made the argument, and other people make the argument about our healthcare system. Well, if that's the free market, why hasn't it worked well? And I don't think that at all is a free market. And I would say the same thing about our political system. There's a lot of money in it. And I think when you have just two options, it doesn't seem like if, I mean, maybe I'm just looking for reasons for why the free market hasn't worked in this case, but it doesn't feel like a free market when your only two options are Republican and Democrat, and that seems to drive to a great extent what the news sources will be because there are only two options. And maybe we're moving away from that stuff too. When you see people as popular as Joe Rogan and other people online,
Yeah.
that maybe we're headed in a different direction where it's not going to be just CNN and Fox News and MSNBC. It's going to be people getting it from other places.
You could be right. You could be right. And we're going to have to leave it there because we're at the end of the time. Well, this was a sort of a surprise conversation, but I feel like it was an interesting hashing of ideas. So we'll have to talk about what we're going to do next.
Okay, sounds good, Brian.
Hey, Colin.
See ya.
We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.